I would not go up to some kid, even one of my own kids, and say, hey, here's a gun, go do what you want to do with it. That would be absolutely mind-blowingly insane to say something like that. You would have a death wish, you'd have to hate everybody else in your life to give anyone a gun. I'm not going to train you, just go do something. That doesn't make any sense. The kids in my family that I would say to them, here's a gun because you asked to go use a gun, here, you can use it, are the ones that I actually know for certain they know how to use it. They are very familiar with it because I've trained them with it. They showed an interest in the training and the safety, and so now I know that I can trust them.
Thank you for tuning in to the Removing Barriers podcast. I'm Jay.
And I'm MCG.
And we're attempting to remove barriers so we can all have a clear view of the cross.
This is episode 39 of the Removing Barriers podcast. And in this episode, we'll be sitting down with FB to discuss family, firearms, and safety. FB, welcome to the Removing Barriers podcast, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, definitely. Tell the listeners about yourself, your family, whatever you want to reveal about yourself.
All right. I'm middle-aged. I have a fairly large family. We live in a rural area. Since this podcast is going to be about firearms, I can tell you right away, I have basically set up a small range at my own house for training with handguns. We do use shotguns and ARs on that range as well, AR-15s. Those who are my friends, I certainly welcome them to come and use my range under my supervision. And as you'll find out in this podcast, even my children are interested in guns, and I basically train them and allow them under my supervision to use those guns as well. Not sure what else I should tell you right at the moment. We'll get into some more of that as we go along, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. You said you live in a rural area. You know, I was born and raised in the Caribbean, and there's not much islands in the Caribbean that's very big. But for the folks that live what we consider rural, quote unquote, because there's really no rural area, we'll say they live behind of God's back. It seems like where you live will be considered behind of God's back. It's so far that you have gone at the back of God. Would you agree with that?
Well, I mean, as a Christian, which is another thing I can say for myself, nobody's behind God's back.
Definitely.
It is nice, actually, where I live because there's not that many people. I can see my closest neighbor's house, and he's the only one I can see. When I leave my house to go to the nearest town, I do go through a neighborhood right just down the road from me. But
is that about a mile away?
Well, the neighborhood is only, say, a quarter mile away into the edge of it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a wooded area, plenty of hills. It's a really nice place to live, honestly. I can't imagine living in a better place than where I do.
It sounds like where you live, you have, your freedom. There's no rules like an HOA or anything like that you have to adhere to, which sounds wonderful. And since you have a range on your property, you also obviously take the Second Amendment very seriously and you cherish it. What does the Second Amendment mean to you?
Well, there are opinions on the Second Amendment that range all the way from the Founding Fathers were nuts to say such a thing, all the way to any private citizen should be allowed to own any kind of nuclear bomb or aircraft carrier that they want. For my part, to say what the Second Amendment means to me, I think first you have to kind of dig into why the Second Amendment was actually in the Constitution in the first place. My understanding of the point of the Second Amendment was that the Founding Fathers had just come out of the Revolution, where the King of England had basically ruled with an iron hand and basically wouldn't allow them any of the freedoms that they wanted to have, that they felt they ought to have. As you see in the preamble to the Constitution, they believed they were endowed with certain rights by their creator, and they didn't feel they were even allowed those. So they felt that a government could easily become, how would I explain this? A government could become corrupt, tyrannical, sure. So that they felt that the citizens together needed to be able to have the power to overthrow that government if the government, again, became tyrannical. We can't say that, all government is bad. We should have anarchy. That's actually a silly idea. We have to have government, whether we like it or not. Without government, things just don't work. But at the same time, when a government becomes used by those who are running the government to rule over the people and take from them whatever they want, especially their freedoms, those citizens need the ability to be able to fight back against that government. And what the Founding Fathers, I believe, actually were saying in the Second Amendment was because the government could become tyrannical, The citizens altogether needed to be able to have enough weapons, firepower, whatever other kind of power they could get, if necessary, together to be able to overthrow the government. Which means that because of what they put in there, the Second Amendment technically was sort of saying if private citizens can afford a tank or a helicopter, there's no reason that private citizens should be restricted from having that in the interest of keeping the government technically afraid of its citizens. Because the government should be afraid of the citizens that are under it so that it doesn't overrun them.
So some question mulling around in my head as you say that. Now, as Christians, we know that the Bible says that for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked in Jeremiah. With that in mind, we know that government can become tyrannical easily, and so can the people. So shouldn't the Second Amendment have some kind of a middle ground?
The issue here is that the government is already together. You could almost say it's one unit. There's a government and then there's the people, but the people are individuals. To be able to overthrow the government, the people have to get together. The people are actually going to have to agree this government is bad. We all, or enough of us agree this government is bad. We're going to have to work together to take them down, to stop this, to change the government, whatever we have to do. We have to take those little bits of power that we have and put them together. I'm sure that anybody can tell you, if I had a helicopter and you had a tank, and we put our helicopter and tank together, the two of us aren't going to do anything against the government. My helicopter and your tank aren't enough. It literally takes all the people who are willing to get together and, if necessary, sacrifice their lives. One of the founding fathers said, to water the tree of liberty with the blood of tyrants and patriots. We have to be willing to get together to do that if we're going to take down the government. So as far as, hearts being deceitful above all things and desperately wicked, and therefore that much power shouldn't go in anybody's hands, the government is the one in this case that we would be worried about because they're already together as a unit, if you will.
Right.
Okay. They have the control of the military. They have the control of the FBI, the CIA, the whatever other agencies they can bring to bear on individual or small group of citizens.
Yeah, definitely. It seems like one of those groups that try to organize the people are groups like the NRA, Gun Owners of America. What are your views on those kinds of groups?
I actually have gotten some training, some NRA training. They actually do very well, I believe, in giving an all-around general understanding of guns and how they work in some of their classes. Okay, so for citizens to get training from the NRA, I think is a good thing. First of all, because if you have a gun and you don't know how to use it, or if you don't have a gun, you don't really know anything about guns, they're not going to help you. Matter of fact, if you have a gun, you don't know how to use it, it may hurt you rather than help you.
Yeah.
Okay. So having a gun, I believe you ought to train. And the NRA does offer classes. You can actually get online and have a website. You can get on there and you can look for the particular type of class you're looking for, whether it's in rifles, shotguns, handguns, whether it's an advanced class or a basic class, whichever you have. If you had the basic class, you could get an advanced class. You can even become an instructor through their classes. So for that part, I think they're doing a great thing. I have not personally had to deal with the legal side of handguns as far as being in a shooting or having somebody shoot at me or whatever. So I haven't had to deal with the NRA as a legal group. But I do know that they worry the government. And to me, that's a good thing. They must be on the right path. If the government is afraid of the NRA, then the NRA is probably, this may be painting with too broad of a brush, but it seems to me that if the government is afraid of a particular group that is trying to guarantee the rights of citizens to protect themselves, that group's probably on the right track.
So it seems that in the nation today, the conversation about whose job it is to protect who is up for discussion. We've seen last year how the riots have really caused a lot of people to realize that they probably will want to have a gun, which is why we've seen record number of gun sales last year. And people are, I think, by and large, are beginning to realize that maybe it's not the responsibility of local law enforcement or even of the government to protect themselves and their families. In your opinion, whose responsibility is it to protect the family?
It's my responsibility to protect my family at the very beginning. Can I do it by myself? No, but I may be able to hold off an attacker long enough for the police to get there. If the attacking force is big enough that I can't handle it myself, maybe put it that way. There's a lot of things you could do for security, which we may get into in a little bit here, but as much as I can, I'm not an official on security, but Personally, I believe that primary responsibility of protection belongs to the husband, the father.
Even if the wife is a better shooter?
Well, that's what I was getting ready to say, actually. Even though he is the head of protection, I believe, his wife ought to be kind of second to that. If he can't protect them or if she is a better shooter, I think that as a man, and maybe this is an antiquated way of thinking, I don't think I ought to put my wife in harm's way. If necessary, I may have to stand in front of her and let her shoot over my shoulder. But it really, honestly, is the father's responsibility, if necessary, to give his life for his family. Second to that will be the wife, the mother, who already has that maternal instinct to protect her children anyway. And then third in line is not the police, but the older siblings. Because if you trained your children to defend your house, to defend their family, then I believe, especially with young boys, we should be training them already to defend their sisters. Not necessarily with a handgun. You know, if somebody challenges their sister, somebody wants to beat on their sister, they need to be the one who steps and says, hey, you're not going to mess with my sister.
Right.
You know, this is my family. They need to get that early on, the idea that this is my family and I'm going to do what I can to protect it. You know, even on the playground, when some kid wants to, you know, beat on your little brother or your sister or whatever it may be, I believe they really ought to learn to stand up, if possible, to that. Okay. When it comes to, you know, thinking, well, you know, we don't need guns, the police will protect us. Most altercations with a burglar or other criminal coming to your house, they're over long before you can ever call the police. Mm-hmm. So far before you can call the police, there's almost no point in calling the police. Because the police are going to get there and they're going to be there to clean up the scene. They're going to pick up the pieces. But it's too late for your family. You cannot rely on the police to do it. Not because they're ineffectual or they're not good at their jobs. It's just there's just not enough time for them to get there unless they were already around the corner. And you can't rely on that. Okay? The only reason I can think of why they might be there before the altercation gets over with would be if they're actually chasing this guy from another scene. He's already committed a crime and he's coming to your house. Well, you can't rely on a criminal to only come to your house after they've already been to someone else. Right. You can't rely on them to commit a crime in your family only after they've committed a crime with someone else. You could be the first one. And if you're the first one, the police will not get there before it's all over because they won't even know about it. So the only time when you can rely on the police, I think, if you can't take care of it yourself, will be what I would call a barricade situation. You know, whether he barricades himself in your house by himself, or if he barricades himself in your house with you or members of your family as hostages. The police may get there before it's all over. Other than that, you can't really rely on them to be there. You're going to have to expect to be the one to do the work yourself.
Yep.
I was going to piggyback on what you just said about a barricade situation. Obviously, the cops won't get there in time, and you have to be your own defense. Do you think that firearms are the best option in terms of self-defense? Or, because I've heard people say things along the lines of, well, you know, I don't necessarily need a gun. Maybe I could run to the kitchen and grab a knife. Or maybe we could, you know, have a taser of some sort, or maybe some other non-lethal option because they're just so queasy about guns. Do you think firearms are the best option? Or do you think that these people have a point? Like, we don't necessarily have to shoot to kill. Could disable or stun or sleep someone.
Well, first thing, it doesn't matter whether it's a gun or a taser or a knife or a loud scream. Well, a loud scream could be counted out of this one. Any weapon you might use against defense against an assailant, you have to train with. So if you're going to spend your time training with a knife, you can go out there and slice up pumpkins and stab straw dummies. And that's good training if you get within arm's reach of the guy. But most guys that are going to come into your house and attack your family, before they ever come to the front door, they already expect they're going to fight you. They're in it for the violence. Okay? This is assuming they have come to your house to do violence, rather than coming to your house as a friend or other person that's there as an acquaintance or whatever, and then things get violent. If you're talking about someone who's going to come and break into your house, they expect to do violence.
Oh, that's interesting, because I know of a congresswoman in Texas who insists that people who break into your house, they just need money and you really shouldn't kill them. And so it sounds like you're saying people that come to your house are there for violence. And so you ought to be prepared and have that mindset.
Well, okay, let's suppose, for instance, that they don't think anybody's home and they really are just kind of trying to sneak in, and they might break the door in because it's easier than picking the lock, and they're just coming in to steal stuff. And then, surprise, I'm standing in there with a shotgun. They decided they were willing to take the chance that my stuff is worth more than their lives.
Oh.
Yeah, no, I don't know if you remember, not that long ago, people were saying when people break into your house, you know, you really think your stuff is worth more than people's lives? You would really kill people to keep your stuff? Mm-hmm. They twisted things around because they decided when they came into your house, they were willing to take the chance that your stuff is worth more to them than their own life was. They were willing to put their life on the line just to get your stuff. If you've already decided that your life isn't worth as much as my stuff is you, why are you challenging me that I would defend my stuff?
Right. Also, one thing we probably need to keep in mind is that cockroaches normally travel in bunches. So it's not normally one bad guy. It's going to be two or three or four. So
yes, this is
better be prepared.
Although it has been demonstrated, it was actually demonstrated in a court of law, and I don't remember exactly what the case was and how this went, but it was demonstrated that a person with a knife who is expecting to do violence to someone else, they can actually close the distance of 21 feet before you can pull your handgun from your holster. It was demonstrated by a martial artist in a court of law for the purpose of demonstrating the person with a knife could actually kill someone with a gun in a case. So the person brought a knife to a gunfight. The old expression, don't bring a knife to a gunfight. Well, they did. And they demonstrated at a distance of 21 feet, if you're trained to do it, you can actually cover that 21 feet and kill the person before they can actually shoot you with a gun. But that's a very fit martial artist who has trained in martial arts and the use of the knife and expects the moment they see the gun to cover that 21-foot distance. A normal housewife, a kid playing his video game, they're not going to get up, run to the kitchen, and get a knife, cover 21 feet, and stab the guy coming in the door with a gun. So it's better if you're going to have to pit your life against his to have something equal to what he's got, a gun. And I don't know why you would say, well, that's not fair, so we need to make things even. As far as I'm concerned, if the guy comes in with a handgun, if you can get a cannon, get a cannon. It's bigger and better. I'm not really saying cannon because anyway, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. You want the odds to be as lopsided in your favor as possible.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. The only way you can say that someone cheated is if you lost the fight. Okay? You need to win the fight.
Right.
Yep.
There's no rules except you got to win the fight because you have to survive. And that's the point. Survive.
Mm.
Especially if your family is involved, definitely you want to win the fight.
Especially.
Exactly. So Joy and I have a plan just in case the worst should happen. And even though she's the better shooter, I will be confronting the perps first from a position where I can see them and they can't see me.
Yes.
If the likely chance that they get by me because I'm such a poor shooter. And all this was before we lost all our guns in a boating accident. So keep that in mind.
This is all hypothetical now, yes.
Right. And if that should happen, if they get by me, I have some confidence in my wife that she can hit the target as many times as she wish. But of course, firearms are lethal. And also we want to have the safety aspect of it. How do we balance the two? Or how should a responsible firearm owner balance the two? Meaning make it accessible and also keeping it safe from children.
When it comes to lethality and safety, those are two, almost the opposite extremes. Because if I carry a firearm loaded in my hand all the time, I'm probably about as lethal as I can get with the handgun. You want to be slightly more lethal, I guess I could hold it up shoulder height, aiming behind the sights everywhere I walk. The gun's pointed out in front of me. As long as someone doesn't come behind me, I'm as lethal as I can get. Okay. On the far extreme, you take all the bullets out of the gun, lock them in one safe, take the gun, take it apart into all its separate pieces, and then lock those pieces into another safe. And that's probably about as safe as it's going to get. I can't say where any particular person needs to draw the line. At what point they're going to be, this much lethality and this much safety along that line. Everyone's going to have to decide that for themselves. But there are a few things you consider that might help to make it slightly more lethal and still a little more safe. There's a lot of different quick release gun safes out there. I haven't actually tried any of them out. For me, I don't know that keeping the gun in a safe is actually going to allow the proper amount of lethality in the gun by putting it in a safe. For myself, I happen to carry one on my side. If I'm awake, there's a gun on my side. I've trained myself, and it does take some training to actually wear a gun on your hip and do life with a gun on your hip. It's not the same as just going out there without the gun and doing life without it. There are some major things that change. For one, sometimes choose the way you sit or where you sit based on the fact you have a gun at your side, which if you sit in the wrong kind of a chair or in the wrong place, you may not be able to actually reach the gun if you need it. So there's no point in having the gun at your side if you can't reach it. Well, I do carry on my hip all the time. Okay. But one way, say if you have a gun at the house that you want to make accessible to those who know how to shoot it, who are in that line of defense in your house, if you will, but not accessible to others, one of the first things to remember is that a gun's not accessible to someone who doesn't know it's there, as long as it's not in a place they can accidentally stumble on it. On top of the cabinet in the kitchen. If you put a lock, like a trigger lock or something on the gun, you got to go find the keys. When there's an altercation of any sort, you have to go find the keys, or even if you know where they are, get the keys, put them in the lock, unlock the gun, then pull the gun down and use it. And more than likely, if somebody knows you're going for the gun, you're not going to get there. So I guess the first thing I would say is make sure that if you're going to have a gun that can be used for the defense of your house, for the defense of the family while they're home, it's going to be like a piece that stays at the house. Make sure those who can shoot know where it is. And keep it in a ready manner.
Meaning one in the chamber?
I was supposed to say with one in the chamber and the safety on, if it has a safety. I'll give you a little detail here. I carry a Glock, and those who do carry handguns would know that Glocks don't have safeties.
Right.
As far as I know, no Glock has a safety on it. There is a safety on every handgun that every handgun should have, and you teach your kids about that safety. And we can talk about that when it comes to teaching kids about firearms a little bit. But the Glock in particular does not have a mechanical safety on the gun. Okay? So I would never leave my gun someplace where someone could get to it with one in the chamber, because they could accidentally put the finger on the trigger and shoot a hole in something. Hopefully not somebody, but that's a possibility. But as far as keeping guns around the house, I think keeping them in a place where those who can use them and should be trusted to use them, so where they know where they are. Younger kids can also know where they are, I think, as long as you train them to leave them alone. Again, something we can get to here. We can discuss that in a little bit here. But I think one of the biggest things is you have to have some accessibility to a gun, otherwise it's of no use. It'll be great for target practice, but you can't use it for anything else if you don't have it accessible.
Just now, you talked about how younger kids could know where the gun is as long as you've trained them not to interfere with it, to leave it alone. So it sounds like there are levels of training depending on the age of the child. Should we introduce our children to firearms? And if so, how would you suggest going about doing that in a safe but also practical manner? One
of the things I thought of early on, you guys, for the sake of the audience, I can tell you guys actually sent me a list of questions to consider before we discussed this.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I considered with this is some children maybe should not be taught about firearms. This might get a little personal to some people. I don't mean to step on anybody's toes in saying this, but if your children are not well trained, well disciplined, if they don't respect their elders, if they can't be, to use an older, much rougher term, brought to heel, if you will, if you can't tell them stop and they actually listen to you and stop, having them anywhere around firearms maybe isn't a good idea. If they're not going to listen, if they're not going to pay attention, they're not going to be able to be reasoned with well enough to actually teach them. They don't have a teachable enough spirit to be able to teach them about it. That's, I think, more about the raising of the children than it is about the firearms themselves. Before you can consider allowing a child around a firearm, you have to consider whether that child will listen, whether they can actually be taught to learn, be taught about firearms, and be trusted to actually learn the lessons they need to learn. Okay? But if you do raise your children with discipline, with respect, with an understanding that what I'm about to say is serious, you need to listen to me and pay attention, then you can teach them, and I believe you can start teaching them. Don't misunderstand what I'm about to say. You can actually start teaching them as soon as they understand the idea of a gun. Okay? When they point a finger gun, thumbs up, pointer fingers point at somebody in their pew pew or bang bang or whatever they're going to say, you can start teaching them basics from that point. Now, 2-3-year-olds probably not really going to understand what trigger discipline is or what it means to muzzle somebody with a gun or any of that kind of stuff. But you can kind of start right there by saying, hey, you can't point that at someone unless you're going to kill them. You can't do that, whatever. And start there. As they get a little older, they get squirt guns and they play with Nerf guns. That's an excellent place to teach them trigger discipline. For those who are listening and don't know, aren't quite clear on what trigger discipline is, as someone who carries a Glock, which has no safety on it, one of the very first things I teach anybody, I don't care how old you are, if you go out to me with a gun range for the first time, one of the first things I will say to you is, where's the most important safety on a handgun? And my kids know the first thing they're going to do when I say, what's the most important safety on a handgun, is they're going to stick up their pointer finger. That's the most important safety on a handgun. You keep that finger off the trigger unless you're ready to shoot it. It's a split-second difference to put your finger beside the barrel, to put it on the trigger. It doesn't take that long to do, so learn to keep it off the trigger. Make it a subconscious action. And you can teach little kids that with a Nerf gun. You can teach little kids that with a squirt gun. If you have sons like mine, they like to use power tools. My older son likes to use power tools. My younger son's not into that yet. You could even teach them with a drill, for instance, or a saw, anything that's got a trigger on it. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to use the tool. And it will become automatic. When you carry a gun, you'll automatically carry it with your finger off the trigger. Okay? And then as they get a little older, maybe even when they're putting their toys away, you can teach them about not muzzling somebody, basically barrel discipline, paying attention to where you point the gun. Don't point in a direction where you can shoot somebody if you're not trying to shoot them, here they are carrying the toy box, and well, most kids want to play with it as they carry it in the toy box. That's how they do with their toys. But you can still teach them, hey, if you're not playing with the toy like you're going to shoot somebody, you need to point it in a different direction. So you have that, that safety in mind. I mentioned taking NRA classes before. They have a bunch of good ideas as far as general overall safety when shooting guns.
Mm-hmm.
To me, those are the two absolute top most important things, regardless of any of the other safety things. Number one, keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot it. Number two, pay attention to where you point the barrel. If you have those two, you have almost all the safety you need.
Right.
Okay. Then this, I think, is almost as important as all the rest of that when it comes to teaching children. Children are naturally curious. They want to know about stuff. And movies teach that guns are cool. And they do hear about the friends who went hunting and they didn't get to go hunting and they got to carry a gun. And that was cool. Or other stuff about guns. It's cool. So because kids are naturally curious, I think we need to satisfy their curiosity rather than hide that away so that it's constantly this mystery they really want to unwrap. Because if you keep holding it off and keep hiding it from them, eventually they're going to say, Dad or Mom doesn't want me to know. The only way I'm going to find out is to go behind their back. And now they're going out there by themselves with nobody to save them, nobody to help them, and they're going to go do stupid stuff with a gun because nobody's there to help them. For my own kids, I satisfy their curiosity as much as they want. And I've actually told pretty much all of them, if you want to shoot, let me know and we'll set up a time to shoot. So they can actually go out there when they want and satisfy any more curiosity they have and try it out for themselves and, do it.
That makes sense. You've removed the mystery, so there's no temptation to pursue it behind your back. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, to your point, though, I know Jay and I definitely, even when the boys will take their Legos and make it in the form of a gun, will insist that they don't point the muzzle at anybody and they have muscle discipline and stuff like that. And
yes,
definitely, even if I, before I lost all my firearms in a boating accident, my boys will look at me and like want to touch my gun or something. And I was like, okay, you can touch it as long as I'm here. But I do insist with them, hey, if I'm not here, don't be touching the gun.
That's right.
And
I would assume then that you've trained your boys so that they know to obey.
Oh, definitely.
If they don't obey, there are consequences.
Definitely. They have a mother who was a former Marine. You're listening to the Removing Barriers podcast. We are sitting down with FB talking about family, firearms, and safety. We'll be right back.
Sometimes, no matter how great the selection, you just can't find exactly what you want. Design It Yourself custom gift baskets solve that problem by allowing you to choose the specific products you want to include with your unique gift basket. And in addition to hand selecting the products, you can further personalize your custom basket by adding coffee mugs, stuffed animals, mylar balloons, or even an imprinted ribbon. When you're done, we'll put it all together in a one-of-a-kind, perfect basket and ship or hand deliver it directly to your lucky recipient. Click in the description section to design your basket today. Training kids in safety is a given, obviously, when it comes to firearms, but should we be training children in how to actually operate the weapon? And I know that earlier you said, if that kid's not listening or if they just have issues with like authority, they probably shouldn't be taught anything in firearms besides don't touch that weapon. But do you think that children should be taught in firearm operation as well?
Well, in all fairness, that's part of the mystery of firearms, if you will. So if you want to clear up that mystery, take away that natural curiosity that could get them into trouble with it, you kind of have to teach some of the operation of firearms. To me, I think that you ought to teach them as they get old enough to be able to shoot the gun. I think you should teach them everything all the way from loading the gun to cleaning the gun after you're done shooting it, including if you can get them to understand the science behind it. I probably give my children too much information on this. They probably like, okay, that's enough. I don't want to think about that part of it. Even like the basic science of how the gases from the cartridge expand to push the bullet out and what it does to the slide and how that all works together. That mechanical science stuff, to me, that's just cool. I love that kind of stuff, which means I talk about it to my kids. Like I said, it's probably more than they actually want to hear. But I do think that you ought to teach them how to operate the handgun. If for no other reason, then there have actually been, although the news, the liberal news especially, but some conservative news may be a little worried about talking about this kind of stuff, but sometimes you'll find news items, if you can find them, where children have actually shot attackers. People have come to their house, mom was in the other room, didn't know what was going on, and the person broke in the door, and the kid did the only thing they knew and grabbed the gun and shot the person. Seems like most of those happen in Texas. But if children do know how to use the weapon, it's going to make them a little safer, not less safe. The trouble is the kids that don't actually know how to use it. Hey, what's this thing for? Why does this work with this? Oops. But if they know what it's for and how it works, it actually makes them more safe, not less.
Yeah, it seemed like a lot of firearm accident happen because at least happen from people who don't understand gun. Like they take up a gun and they feel it's unloaded, or they drop the magazine and say, oh, you see, there's no bullets in there, not realizing that there could be one in the chamber. So
yes,
with that in mind, because one of the big things on my mind as a father is firearm accident. How do you teach your kids the operation of firearm and the possibility of, the worst happen on a range or in your home, firearms mishap? How do you navigate that with all what you have just said?
Are you asking how I keep those things from happening? Or are you asking how do I prepare the eventuality that it does happen?
Kind of both. Are you worried about it happening, and how do you prevent it from happening? Because, I can imagine that in my mind, I have boys and I'm like, I wouldn't want them to get a hold of a firearm, and especially one that I might own, and injure themselves or someone else or have an accident, whatever the case may be.
Well, how would you keep an adult from having that kind of an accident? Because, we think about kids having accidents with firearms. We don't really talk much about adults having accidents with firearms, but the answer is actually still the same. Hey, I just went and bought a firearm. I don't know a thing about it, but I'm going to go out and play with it and see if I can figure it out. And next thing you know, you shoot yourself in the foot. You would keep that from happening by teaching them how to use it properly. And then, if possible, cause them to continue to train with it so they become very familiar with the operation of it. But while you're teaching them the familiarity of the operation of it, you need to make sure that they also become just as familiar with the safety aspects of it. Always assume there's a bullet in the chamber, for instance.
Right.
Know what's behind your target when you shoot at it. Keep your finger off the trigger, so that those things become completely natural to them. Like I said earlier, even to the point, I would teach my children, even to the point of having them help clean the guns, which means they know how the guns are broken down. They know how to put the guns back together. So supposing they were out shooting and they get a jam and they try to unload the jam before I can step right up to them and stop them or whatever, if they know how the firearm works, if they know how the firearm is broken down and taken apart and put back together and so on and so forth, they probably can clear the jam without any help at all. I do have at least some of the teenagers in my house. There's at least one teenager in my house. If she were to come up to me today and say, hey, Dad, can I borrow a 9mm handgun? I'm going to go out and shoot in the range. I'd be like, yeah, go ahead. And I wouldn't feel like I even had to go out there with him, because I know that particular teenager of mine is very familiar with firearms and knows exactly what she's doing with firearms. She knows all the safety of it and could go shoot them without a problem. There is another one of my children who's a boy who I have actually allowed to go out there by himself with a 22 handgun or a 22 rifle. Yes, I know there's a possibility of an accident, but I want him to be able to go out there and shoot even if I'm not there, so that he knows what he's doing and can do it. I don't go out there and say, oh, I have no idea where he is and what he's doing. I know where he is and what he's doing. And I am keeping an eye on the other kids as well, making sure that he's taking safety precautions. But there does come a time when you have to say, well, this is a dangerous thing, but I'm going to go ahead and let my kids do this dangerous thing, having trained them how to do this dangerous thing, so that when they become adults, they can still do dangerous things and not be afraid to do them because they have to. Or do things that are maybe just slightly dangerous and then say, hey, look at me, I did this slightly dangerous thing, I'm a hero, everybody give me praise for it. Because we seem to have so much of both those things in society nowadays. People that are afraid to do the dangerous thing that has to be done, and those who do slightly dangerous or maybe even not dangerous things, but then they want great praise for it because that's how they've been treated all their life.
Right. 2 questions on that's going on in my head. One, does your wife feel the same way, like how you just talk about, you sent your teenager out to maybe go to a range or whatever by him or herself? And 2, it seemed like you really have a level of trust with your kids that you say, hey, you know what? They have a certain age and I'm going to trust them with something dangerous. And I can understand that, because if we change the argument from firearms and say a car, which is, according to statistics, are equally dangerous, because both of them kill about 30 to 35,000 people per year, we kind of say, okay, we're going to give our teenager at 16 a car, but we wouldn't allow them to shoot a gun. So break that down for me.
Okay, well, first of all, we would never allow them to drive in the car without us driving with them first, so that we can see how they drive and say, okay, you're doing this wrong. You missed that thing. You need to do that right. This is not safe. You need to change this particular practice. Things like that. It's the same thing with a gun. I would not go up to some kid, even one of my own kids, and say, hey, here's a gun. Go do what you want to do with it. That would be absolutely mind-blowingly insane to say something like that. You would have a death wish. You'd have to hate everybody else in your life to give anyone a gun. I'm not going to train you, just go do something. That doesn't make any sense. The kids in my family that I would say to them, here's a gun because you asked to go use the gun, here, you can use it, are the ones that I actually know for certain they know how to use it. They are very familiar with it because I've trained them with it. They showed an interest in the training and the safety, and so now I know that I can trust them. And it's the same thing with a car. I mean, we're talking about the firearms, but we did start with the whole thing with the car, so let me go back to that real quick. If you had a child who just really just couldn't, for some reason, couldn't figure out how to drive a car safely, I would think that you would say, yeah, you're not really ready to take the test to get your actual license yet. You need to keep driving this under a permit, so I'm there with you for quite a while longer until you have demonstrated that you really do understand the safety of driving this thing by yourself. Honestly, it's probably a very good comparison between a car and a gun in that way. Now, the car is going to be needed for them to go to work. The gun, hopefully, will never be needed that way.
Right.
But the gun is there for contingencies just in case it ever is needed for that. And when it is needed, it'll be a split-second thing, and you better have it with you. You better be ready to use it, and you better know how to use it. In that way, the gun training is almost more important.
Now, in the questions that we've asked you so far, we've talked about how soon to introduce children to firearms and how to do so. But this question pivots a little bit and asks, how do you talk to your children about firearms given how it's intensely politicized in our culture today?
I used to follow the news all the time, just watch like a lot of news every day. And this wasn't really that long ago. The stuff going on that shows up in the news is just crazy. I mean, there's so much stuff going on. And it's just, if I didn't have faith and trust in a higher power, if I can put it that way, I would be absolutely out of my mind. I'd be so scared probably with some of the stuff that's going on. I do have a trust that there is a God and he's in control of things. And when I get scared of that kind of stuff, I can just go to him and say, hey, I'm scared. Please help me. And he gives me that peace that I need, which is an awesome thing as a Christian. When it comes to my kids, my teenagers are on Facebook and so many other social media networks. I probably couldn't even list them all. Not that they're on all of them, but there's just so many of them out there. And
right.
Honestly, there's a couple of them probably that they're on one. I don't know. They're on, I think, like Instagram, Pinterest, some things like that. But I suppose Facebook is probably where they get most of their stuff. But unless they're very much interested in the news, they're not going to get that much of it, I think. Unless one of their friends who is more interested in it says, hey, here's a funny meme. And they put on there like, I don't know what that's all about. And they go looking for that news, or maybe they might have one or two sites, or they might see some ads. But for the most part, unless they're actually looking for that kind of stuff, they won't know what's going on. And I'm kind of glad they seem better off that way.
Right.
However, that's a long way around to getting around is what I'm going to say. And that's this. I do think sometimes they need to know some of that kind of stuff. They need to know how other people feel about situations going on. Black Lives Matter thing, for instance, abortion, LGBTQ issues, voting rights in the last election, whatever, So if I don't think they have any idea, or if I think they have a very little idea, or even if I think they have some more than that, I still want to actually talk to the older ones about it. To go with the issue of satisfying their curiosity, I might have to be a little bit careful with some of the things I say, but for the most part, if one of my kids asks me a question, I'm going to do what I can to answer the question. Not in a way that hides what's going on from them, but in a way that they can understand on their level, which may mean there's some things that I don't say just because they might not quite understand it. And also every now and then there might be some things I don't say because I don't want to take away that innocence that they have yet.
Right.
But for the most part, I think they do kind of need to know not everybody thinks it's okay to have guns. I'm not really one of those guys in my family that just like, I shouldn't say that, so I'm just not going to say anything. I generally say what I think to my kids. So I don't know that that's an issue. I don't think that not knowing what the general view of the public is, I'm not sure that's really an issue with my kids.
Right. You know, I came to this country in 2006 from the Caribbean, and I went to college. I graduated in 2010, and I started working. And I think it was around the shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, their elementary school. And I wasn't really following the political aspect of firearms or even U.S. politics on a whole, to be honest. I would just go and get my news because where I'm from, the news is not necessarily political like it is in this country.
Yes.
I was listening to CNN, and CNN was saying that, you know, why is it that the shooter had a weapon of war and an automatic weapon and all this stuff? And I'm saying, you know, that makes sense. Why is it that, you know, citizens are able to have these powerful weapons and these automatic weapons? And I remember I was saying that to a college friend of mine that I graduated with. I was talking about it. And he just basically said, you know what, MCG, go and research firearms for yourself.
There you go.
And I was blown away. Basically,
Yes.
Nothing that they said about firearm and that segment of CNN were correct. Nothing. It wasn't a fully automatic weapon. It was semi-automatic. I was blown away. I was like, how can I trust the news, you know? So now, no matter if it's coming from CNN, Fox, or wherever, I am double checking that like with as much sources as possible because I realize now I can't trust the news. I just can't, you know? So keeping that in mind, whether or not we can trust the news and all the politics that involve in firearms, how do you, you know, kind of say, navigate that with your kids in terms of, hey, you can trust this media over here, but you can't trust this media over here. How do you have them research firearms and research what people are saying? Or I guess I'm looking more of the social in polite company, because there's sometimes, you know, you can't have certain conversation in polite company. You know, you can't just talk about guns, you know, because of the politics and stuff like that. How do you navigate that with your kids? Because I'm imagining, like, for me, if I'm in Walmart, my kids might just all of a sudden start talking about guns or talk about something that is taboo in the society today.
I don't recall if we already started the podcast, so I'm going to go over this again real quick, just a little bit. I think this was actually before we actually started recording, or maybe not, I don't remember. We talked about the fact that things are a little different when you're in a rural area than when you're in an urban area. Using your example of going into Walmart, probably a lot of the people in the Walmart, in our local Walmart, if you were talking about guns, they'd be like, ooh, what kind of guns? You know, because it's a rural area, everyone's got guns. And rural areas tend to lean more towards we'll say the conservative side of issues, which means more often than not, most of the people in the area kind of look at the Second Amendment as a necessary thing and as something they should even enjoy practicing, having guns and using those guns for targets, for training, for hunting. So honestly, that's not as much of an issue that we've had. I know that when it comes to researching, and maybe this is a place where I'm a little bit weak, and maybe I ought to work on a little bit, my kids normally come to me to get the perspective on any news they've heard, which does put the burden on me to make sure that I'm being as accurate as I can when I tell them my perspective on the news. But at the same time, I do need to kind of push them more toward researching some of that on their own, trying to figure that stuff out on their own so they can develop their own opinion about it rather than taking my opinion. But that's one of the things about growing up. That's one of the things that happens as you grow up. You start to have your own opinion about things. So I think as my kids get older, my intent basically is as much as possible to have those kind of conversations with them and ask them, you know, what do you think of these situations? And offer them what I do know as straight up facts, not trying to say, here's my opinion on those facts, so that they can make their own opinions on the facts, and we can talk about them back and forth, so they can develop their own opinion about it.
Right. Individuality and also trusting their parents.
Yes. And because every child has a different personality, they're going to come at it from a different perspective than I would. You know, so I have one daughter who's more emotional. She may come to it from the side of, well, you know, the victims must have thought this way, or how horrible would it have been to be there, so that must be a bad thing because that would have been a horrible thing. Whereas somebody else might be from the side of more adventuresome, we'll say, and they'd be like, boy, I wish I could have been on the viewpoint of this person that did this thing, or, in the same story, and they're coming from two different perspectives because they have different personalities. So as much as possible, I kind of want to do what I can to guide them in the way they think of them without stunting that growth that comes from their own personality. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
Sure. Oh, definitely.
Sure.
What's running through my mind, though, because we're talking about children and firearms and safety, and how do you answer your critics? Because I'm imagining that someone will listen to this podcast and say, you know what? Here's a dad living in some rural place in this country, and not only does he have a range on his property, but he introduces kids to guns, and he's teaching them about guns and how to break down guns and stuff like that. How would you answer your critic?
Generally speaking, I don't answer a critic until I find out what is they're actually thinking. Because a lot of times people will come to you and they'll say, well, this thing that you're doing is bad. But before I can answer what they've said, I have to understand why they think what I'm doing is bad. So I have to actually ask them some questions that will hopefully draw them out enough they'll actually have a discussion about it. If someone says to me, this thing you're doing is bad and I don't want to talk about it, I can't really do anything about that. I can't answer them because they're not looking for an answer at all. But if they're willing to say, hey, this thing is bad, and say, here's why I think it's bad, here's the statistics, or here's the things from my own personal life, or this is just my opinion, or this is what I don't understand about it, then we can start to have a discussion. I can find out, in the process of the discussion, I'll find out who they are, where they're coming from. In our society, we have this divide where either you're on one side or you're on the other, and that's all there is to it. You cannot be somewhere in the middle. You must be on this side or that side. That's not a good thing. We need to be able to understand, even if you're on one side instead of the other, you need to understand why the other side is saying what they're saying. I do know that, to use guns and politics as an example, there does seem to be a huge lack of information and a huge amount of misinformation on the other side, if you will, when it comes to guns and politics, that I really wish they would research and actually get some information and even go out and try those things out they say must be horrible things, so they can find out whether they're actually as horrible as they think they are, so that they could discuss things with us. On the other side of things, while I live in a rural area, there is a town nearby, and I do have some friends that live in that town. So when it comes to guns, for us, I can teach my kids, look, if you're going to shoot a gun, point it that direction. There's nobody over there. You don't have to worry about things. Use the bullets in the gun. They're cheap. They work good. Shoot them over there. But when you're talking to someone who lives in a town, for instance, you can't just say shoot over there and just use whatever bullets you got in the gun. You need to explain to them that different bullets do different things in different substances. And they need to think about, if someone does come into their house, which way are they going to point that gun? Whose bedroom is on the other side of that wall? If it goes out of their house toward the next house, is anything going to stop it from going into the neighbor's bedroom? So because I live in a rural area, things are different for me than they are from other people, but I need to be able to understand what other people have to deal with to be able to have that discussion with them. So I guess if someone's going to criticize me for my view on things, before I can even answer that critic back, I have to understand where they're coming from. Okay.
You seem like you want a conversation.
Absolutely. Because, it can't just be, you think I'm wrong, well, I don't like you. That seems to be the way conversations go nowadays. You think I'm wrong, well, I just don't like you. We need to say, you think I'm wrong, why do you think I'm wrong?
Right.
Are we using this term the same way? You said this thing, when I say that thing, I mean this. Is that actually what you're saying, or did you mean something different? And we have to do it as respectfully as possible so other people don't think, they're just making fun of me. They're not going to give me an answer, they're just making fun of me. We have to try to open that conversation. Because if we can't have a conversation with people who are going to criticize us, maybe I better throw something a little more in here. We have to be humble in having that conversation rather than, I'm going to show this guy why he's stupid and I know it. We have to be humble and say, okay, how do you mean this? Or what in your past makes you feel this way about this or whatever, so that we can understand why they're critiquing us. And maybe in the process, they might even say, hey, now I see what you're saying and why you're doing what you're doing. I take back my critique. Maybe,
Or you might agree to disagree.
Sometimes that's what it comes down to. But at least you've heard each other.
Right. They talk about that. What comes to mind, it was the story of this reporter who set out to prove that it was very easy to get a gun. And I think she lived like maybe an hour away. I may be getting my facts not too straight, but I think she lived like an hour away from the nearest Walmart or whatever. So they drove to the Walmart, and when she got there, lo and behold, no one was there to actually help her to get a gun, to show her the gun, because the one or two person that was employed at Walmart that actually was licensed to actually show her the gun wasn't there. So she drove back 2 days later. She got to see the gun. She ready to buy the gun. Now she was surprised that she actually had to fill out her background check form. Lo and behold, her current address and the address on her license, which is their ID that they have to show, did not match. So she had to leave Walmart without the gun. And then she decided to drive back another time. This is the third time she's going to Walmart trying to get the gun. And then when she drove there again, something else come up in her background that she couldn't get a gun. And for the first time, she realized all the narrative that she have heard about how easy it is to buy a gun or you could just ship a gun to your home was false. I wish a lot of people in the media and a lot of the critics of people that own guns would actually go and try to purchase guns, because they'll realize, hey, it's not as simple as it is. And two, you can't have a gun shipped to your home, you know?
That's right. Along those same lines, and I actually just had this conversation with someone not that long ago. I really wish some of these politicians would actually go out and shoot a gun. Maybe get a little bit of training in what kind of gun they're shooting as far as automatic, semi-automatic, whether it's a rifle, a shotgun or pistol or whatever it may be. The difference between a semi-automatic handgun and a revolver. Find out some of this stuff so that when they get up there to say, we need to ban this kind of thing, or they actually maybe know what they're talking about. Because oftentimes I hear some of stuff like, you have no perspective what's going on the other side. You don't even know. All you know is what you want to get done. And I'm not sure you even know why you want to get it done. Because sometimes it's some of the things they do. A big thing to me is they keep passing gun laws. And I'm like, you're not even enforcing the laws you have.
Right.
And passing these gun laws only puts more of a burden on law-abiding gun owners.
Yep.
The criminals are criminals, which means they don't follow the laws. That's what it means to be a criminal. So making more laws doesn't affect them at all. It just puts more burden on law-abiding gun owners.
Yeah, definitely.
It's incredibly irresponsible as well to do something like that, to make laws about something you really have no knowledge of or no perspective, no understanding of. Our current president is famous for having told the American people, what do you need an AR-15 for? Just get a shotgun. Not realizing that the kickback from the recoil from a shotgun will knock you on your bottom, as opposed to, say, the AR-15, which is so much easier to fire. It just goes to speak of the general ignorance is maybe too mean of a word, but I just mean the lack of knowledge surrounding firearms. And I think you're right. If the politicians actually took some time to fire the weapons and get to know what they are so adamant about controlling, then perhaps they can pass laws that don't, well, we wouldn't want them to pass any more laws because all that is infringement, but that's just correct. Not to make so many of these ridiculous laws that hinder law-abiding citizens.
Yeah,
sure.
That is highlighted in the response from whether the left or the right for people who don't understand guns. Even recently, we're probably going to have a podcast later on Mackay O'Brien. And because a lot of folks will say, oh, why didn't the officer just shoot her in the leg or in her hand or shoot the knife out of her hand? I'm no great shot, but yeah. I don't know many people who have the marksmanship to actually do that. That is way harder than it is, because I tell you, I go to the range and I fire at a still target right in front of me at probably 10 yards.
And you take your time.
And you're under no pressure.
No nerves. And I'm telling you, man, I'm saying I'm probably the worst of shots. But I don't know how many people will be able to make a kind of shot, because it's not that easy. If they just go to the range and fire one magazine of shots, they realize, you know what? It's not that easy.
But take that into consideration that all these people that say that, they know how easy it is because Hollywood has told them all the time.
Right.
It's simple. Automatically, if you point a gun, you'll put the bullet exactly where you pointed the gun because you wanted to put it there. That's what Hollywood has said in their movies over and over and over again. Everybody can do that. So why didn't the officers do that? Because Hollywood's trying to tell you a fairy tale. And everybody's started saying, oh, well, this fairy tale is based on facts. Not those facts,
Yeah. Talking about facts, another thing that just popped in my head is that 80% of people who are shot with handguns, 9mm or whatever, 80% of those people actually survive.
Sure.
Handguns are not that great at killing people, but when in Hollywood, you get one shot and they're flying in the air, breaking through windows.
That reminds me of a movie that I saw many, many, many years ago. It's an old movie now called Face Off. And at the beginning of the film, the bad guy is shooting out of an aircraft that is taxiing to take off with one hand. And he hits like every single round actually. And I'm like, there's no way, absolutely no way that can actually happen. But if Hollywood has such power to convince people that this is what guns are, they're going to think that, oh yeah, I know about guns. I saw Face Off, or I saw Die Hard, or I saw, right?
Yes.
Well, the only person who can do that is probably Chuck Norris, but
but he wasn't in either one of those movies. So.
Right.
All right, FB, let's bring it home. Let's bring it home for this episode. So the Bible says in Luke chapter 22 and verse 36, then said he unto them, but now he that had a purse, let him take it, and likewise his scrip. And he that had no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. If you go back to Luke chapter 12, I think it was, Jesus sent out his disciples 2 by 2, and he told them not to take a purse with them. Now in Luke chapter 22, Jesus was actually looking to go on the cross, and he's going to actually depart from his disciples. And his message to them at this point was, hey, take your purse with you, meaning take your money and your scrip. And he said, if you have no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. I was listening to a preacher who said that sword right there could be translated to guns for us today. Question, do you agree with that preacher that sword could be interpreted as a gun for today? And most importantly than firearms and politics and everything that's behind of it, what direction do you and your wife desire to point your children in?
Okay. First of all, yes. I don't see any reason why it would make sense to translate the verse to sword today for today. Because at the time, in the Roman era, the sword was kind of the main weapon that they had. The Chinese, I understand, had gunpowder back that far. They only used it for fireworks. They hadn't really started putting it into cannons and shooting it out of cannons. Much less had they figured out a way to put it into something you could hold in your hand and shoot out, So a sword was the personal self-defense weapon of the day. Whether it was a sword or a knife, a cutting edge is what they had. Nowadays, if you want to carry a knife because you feel that's what the Bible says you should use for self-defense, okay, I won't argue that. But self-defense is self-defense, whether it's with a sword, whether it's with a gun, or whether it's with martial arts. Which brings me to the second question you asked. You asked about me and my wife, how we want to train our kids, what we want to focus on, what we want to be important to them. I've thought in a couple of different aspects. First of all, socially, and I've said this to multiple people before, I want my children to have teeth and claws. And I want them to have the wisdom to know when and how both to use them and when and how not to use them. So I don't just allow my children to shoot handguns because, well, they're not allowed to carry handguns. Not only that, I also take them to martial arts classes. Every single one of my children is registered in a martial arts dojo and is not for tournament purposes. It's actually for fighting on the street. They learn all the down and dirty tricks to beat a guy down if he wants to try to grab them and throw them in a van, or if he's going to break in the door and cause trouble in the house. If they don't have access to a gun, I want them to have access to the next thing they can get. It turns out, and I don't know if this is all over the United States, but I know that here in the state that I live in, minors aren't allowed to carry a knife that's longer than 3 inches, I believe it is. The blade can't be longer than 3 inches. Well, that's still a weapon, I suppose. But if you can't carry anything that'll reach through the ribs to the heart, and the person insists on doing everything they can to hurt you, to destroy you, you have to have some other way of defending yourself than just a knife then. So I give them as many teeth and claws as I can so that when the time comes, they can use them and survive it. That's my plan, socially, if I can put it that way. Socially is probably not the right word, but when it comes to just this physical world we live in. However, far more important than that, I think, is what we want them to have spiritually. When you guys sent me this list of questions to consider this thing, I really sat down and I thought of these things through very, very carefully. So I'd do the best I could at explaining these with the best words I could use. So I think to say for my children spiritually, what I want more than anything is for them to know and understand the hope and peace that comes from knowing an all-knowing, all-powerful creator of the universe as their father. Okay? Because when you know the creator of the universe, who knows everything and can do anything, and you know him as your father, it does give you peace and hope. Because sometimes things get really bad. Sometimes you can't defend yourself. With all the preparation, all the planning you can do, here we can make our home into this fort and nothing bad can happen, because we've trained and we've really set this thing up, and then dad has a heart attack, or the IRS for some reason seizes our accounts and we have no money to pay the bills. The house burns down. I don't know. Bad things happen whether you like it or not, and you can't completely control those things. So when you know God as your father and you know that he loves you and he can do anything and he knows everything, that even when those bad things happen, he's still in control. And those bad things that happen, they're only bad in that they hurt. Romans 8:28 says we know that all things work together for good to those that love God, to those that are called according to his purpose. Which means that when bad things happen, they're not bad things, they're just hard things. So even though we can take the time to teach our children self-defense, and we can train them in the safety and the use of firearms, when we go to bed at night, we can close our eyes and go to sleep knowing there's not a thing that can happen that our Father in heaven didn't already plan.
That's right.
It doesn't mean we throw up our hands and say, oh, well, God planned it, I can't do anything about it. We do the best we can with the circumstances he gives us because that's what he wants us to do. But in the end, we can trust him knowing that he has our best interests at heart.
FB, thank you for joining us on the Removing Barriers podcast.
Oh, thank you again for having me.
Thank you for listening. To get a hold of us or to support this podcast, go to anchor.fm/removing barriers. This has been the Removing Barriers podcast. We attempted to remove barriers so that we all can have a clear view of the cross.